Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sharnjeet Kaur Sandra, or Sharn, and I'm a sessional instructor in the Department of History here at UFE, coordinator of the South Asian Studies Institute, and co-chair of UFE's Race and Anti-Racism Network. We are honored here to hold this vigil today on the traditional territories of the local Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that long before Canada was formed, the Stolo people of the river occupied the land on which UFE is located. They lived and continue to live in the Fraser Valley and Lower Fraser Canyon of what is commonly known as British Columbia, speaking the language of Halkomelem, also known as the upriver dialect. The Stolo have an intrinsic relationship with what they refer to as Salftamuk, or our sacred land. Therefore, we express our gratitude and respect for the honor of living and working in this territory. I'm extra mindful of this relationship to the land, given the ecological and climate disasters taking place around us, and I hope that this will continue to shape and force an action moving forward for all settlers to listen to Indigenous knowledge holders, elders, and keepers of the language, histories, and futures of these lands. We gather here today with open hearts and open minds in recognition of the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women in Canada. Established in 1991 by Parliament, this day, December 6th, marks the day of the 1989 Montreal massacre at L'École Polytechnique, where 14 young women were tragically killed. A day I'm sure many of us remember quite vividly. These women died senselessly that day solely because of their gender and because they were studying engineering. As we continue to remember these women, this day also brings awareness to the continuing occurrence of violence against women in our society that exists today. As we continue to remember these women, this day also brings an awareness through intersections of race and gender and present-day enactments of violence. Over the next few minutes, we will take time to pause and reflect on these two very important themes while honoring the memory of each woman who lost their life at L'École Polytechnique on December 6, 1989. We are pleased to partner on this broadcast with UFE student organization, UFE West, Women in Engineering, Science, and Technology. I now invite Tessa Lewis and Georgia Moore to bring remarks from UFE West.
Thank you, Sharon. I can say that Georgia, myself, and our fellow executives feel very honored to take part in this day of remembrance, along with the rest of the UFE community. December 6th marks a really heartbreaking day in history, one where innocent women lost their lives while pursuing higher education. Maya Angelou once said, "If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going." The recognition of this day is vitally important as we move forward to take action against violence against women. Violence, specifically against women, is prevalent worldwide, including in our own campus community. As an intersectional feminist group, UFE West aims to empower women and minorities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, otherwise known as STEM. Ultimately, we'd like to ensure that STEM is a place where everyone feels welcome. Over the next little while, the goal is to create a safe space to discuss abuse as it pertains to women and what we can do to support survivors.
Thank you, Tessa. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Lola Hawk-Bucher to speak with us about the systemic crisis of Indigenous, missing, and murdered women and girls. Dr. Bucher is from the Stolo Nation and a member of the Lake Babine Nation. She is a river woman who wears the salmon on her regalia as her lineage includes 2 wild salmon corridors in BC. She comes from a long line of matriarch storytellers and resilient women. Today, more than any other time in modern history, the oldest oral Indigenous stories on Salftamuk territory are needing to be told, heard, witnessed, and meaning made for all people. The oldest stories are still informing how to live in respectful relationship to everything on these lands. Dr. Bucher's work includes Indigenous storytelling as a teaching model for Indigenous ecological knowledge and history. Indigenous language revitalization has been integrated into her work as the river language Halkomelem connects to all aspects of the environment and informs her identity and worldview. Dr. Bucher is an Indigenous professor teaching in the Indigenous Peoples Knowledge Program at UFE. She is a community activist for the river language, a defender for the wild salmon, and an advocate for elders and children.
Iswail, Siam Siayas. Good day, respected elders, leaders, and dear friends. Chitham, thank you for being here today. Lola Hawk Telsqui. My name is Lola Hawk Laura Bucher. I'm a river woman. I'm Stalo and a member of the Lake Babine Nation. Today, we gather in remembrance for the women and girls who have died from violence in our country and pledging to always remember them, all the while not ceasing to fight for those unaccounted for who are missing and need to be found. It seems like forever that families, survivors, and communities have advocated for the safety, security, and equity for women, girls, and two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and asexual plus peoples. This has been especially important to our Indigenous communities as we reclaim power and place through a resilience that calls for change, transformative change to end all forms of gender and race-based violence. The words of Nicmac poet and author Anna Marie Sewell in this excerpt from Washing the World brings us to a moment that we're sharing today. She writes, once a year, in the dark of the year, we wash the whole world in a day. For one day, we cry until they're home, until they all are home. These things we gather in a blanket, bone and sand and sage. We wash the world. Between us, we hold this blanket, fill it with tears, and when we have cried from one dawn to the next, then we will rise and we will dance until they're home, until they're all home. On our Self-Temoth territory, our Swokwiyam, our oldest stories guide us. They teach us to live respectfully on this land. Our stories teach us we must take care of everything that belongs to us and make good decisions for Temoth the Tal, our Mother Earth. On this day, I have a request for each of you. Will you join me in bringing hearts and minds together to imagine a world where all women and girls, all children, live free from violence, where they feel honored and respected, safe and secure? How would that world look to you? If you were a child, how would it feel to grow and be loved in such a way? Calls for justice begin by recognizing the truth for everyone. This means rethinking racial and gender stereotypes, confronting racial harassment, discrimination, and physical violence. Community activist and Gitxsan member Gladys Radix wrote in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls, the Government of Canada has a responsibility of ensuring every citizen is protected by the laws of the land. All people living in Canada have the responsibility to live in peace and with respect for basic human rights, including safety and justice. It is time for justice, closure, accountability, equality, and true reconciliation. It is time to end violence against women, girls, and two SLGBTQIA peoples. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. Kwa'esai. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lola Huckbucher. It is my pleasure now to invite Michelle Giordano, Senior Program Officer, Site Manager for the Public Health Agency of Canada. Michelle holds an MA in Criminal Justice from the University of the Fraser Valley and a BA Psychology from the University of Alberta. She has significant experience working with criminal justice systems to identify and create solutions for gaps in service, such as creating reporting options for victims of violence and ensuring that marginalized women are able to access health and safety supports. She served on several boards, including the Correctional Service of Canada, Citizen Advisory Committees for Matsqui Institution and Fraser Valley Institution, as well as the Fraser Valley Violence Against Women in Relationships Committee.
Thank you. Every year, we remember the 14 women who lost their lives on December 6th. They died just because they were women. Each year, we remember these 14 women with a moment of silence. But we must not remain silent. We need to speak out against all violence. We need to recommit to take action and confront all forms of gender-based violence wherever we see it. We need to be open to look where we traditionally have not looked, in institutions of authority that have been plagued with male toxic values. Like the judge who told a victim of violence that she only needed to keep her legs shut and she could have avoided the violence she experienced. Or a broken military system where women have for years complained about the violence they experienced at the hands of their colleagues and their superiors, only to be left with empty words and no action. Women are speaking up and finding their voice. We are saying enough. The Me Too movement forced society to face the gender discrimination, the sexual assault, and harassment that is prevalent in all parts of our communities, from public male-dominated institutions to violence within private homes. It is everyone's responsibility to speak out against gender violence, from our leaders in public institutions to individuals in our community. We all have a role to play. It is apparent the change that is required when we hear from the former commissioner of the RCMP, who explained that workplace misconduct and other forms of abusive behavior were simply the actions of a few rotten apples. Change is possible, but it will take a willingness within these institutions to confront systemic issues that contribute to gender discrimination. Public institutions need to be held accountable for the outcomes of reports of sexual assault and harassment, crimes that need to be treated as crimes. We must also acknowledge that thousands of other women do not report their abuse to authorities, whether it is inside or outside the home, whether it is within a public institution or on the streets of our local community, hidden from public view. There are many reasons why women do not report the violence they experience, such as a mistrust of the criminal justice system, fear of their abuser, or possibly fear of being shunned by family and community members for reporting abuse to authorities. Women and girls who face other oppressions such as heterosexism, transphobia, racism, women who are living in poverty, homeless, suffering from an addiction or mental health concern, are even more vulnerable to gender-based violence. We need to support victims of violence regardless of their life circumstances, regardless of their status in society, their race, their sexual identity, or their mental health. No one deserves to die just because they are a woman. We cannot be silent about gender-based violence. We need to take action and challenge the attitudes, behaviors, and sexism that contribute to making victims of violence in our communities. Action requires all of us to educate ourselves on the resources available within our own community. The Fraser Valley has the Violence Against Women in Relationships Committee, we refer to as the VAWARE Committee, which consists of criminal justice partners who come together to effectively support women, children, and youth fleeing violence. Supports to women experiencing violence include safe homes for women and their children to flee from violence in their own home, specialized victim service support workers within the community and at the police station, third-party reporting options for victims of sexual assault, specialized outreach support workers, police officers assigned specifically for intimate partner violent crimes, Crown Counsel who specialize in intimate partner violence, and court support workers who are available to support victims of violence as they navigate the criminal justice system. Help those women who fear speaking up about their violence. Support them and stand together with them and state that violence is no longer accepted in our community. We are all responsible for this, regardless of our gender. We can see the change happening when men become involved. One example of men becoming involved in denouncing violence against women is the Moose High campaign, an Indigenous-led movement of men and boys who stand up to end gender-based violence. Today's remembrance of the 14 women killed on December 6th is commemorated with a white ribbon. There is also a men's movement called the White Ribbon Campaign, a campaign that began in 1991 where men wear white ribbons to state that they will never commit, condone, or remain silent about all forms of gender-based violence. I was one of the fortunate women. I graduated from the University of Alberta in 1989 as a woman. I have been fortunate to carve out a career supporting women who have experienced violence. When I began work, we vowed as a collective of women that we would end violence against women in 20 years, just as the women who said that before us. We can see change in behavior and attitude since December 6, 1989, but sadly, we continue to witness violence in our communities and within our public institutions. We must all stand in solidarity to collectively state that violence is no longer accepted in our world. Thank you.
I now invite Patty Makahonic to speak with us today about intersectionality in the prevention of violence against women. Patty has been with Ann Davis Transition Society as Executive Director since November of 2013, founder of the Fraser Valley Marches for Women March, opening a new 22-bed women's shelter and tripling service. She is most proud of the ADTS Caring and Compassionate team. Patty was awarded the Provincial Crime Prevention and Public Safety Award of Distinction in 2018, the 2014 Distinguished Alumni Award, and in the top 40 alumni of UFE. After being widowed, her successful lobbying efforts were instrumental in passing of BC's Bill C-37 in 2003, concerning the rights of children and survivors of workplace facilitators.
Thank you. I'm honored and humbled to be invited to share with you on this important day. I've spoken for the past 8 years at National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women ceremonies. This year is especially important as a woman leader, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. It is clear, as reported by UN Women, that violence against women is a worsening global crisis. In our own neighborhoods and communities, there are women and girls living in increased danger. I see this every day in the work that I do. Around the world, conflict, climate-related natural disasters, which we are experiencing right here locally, food insecurity, and human rights violations are compounding violence against women. More than 70% of women have experienced gender-based violence in some crisis settings. And in countries both rich and poor, gender prejudice has further fueled acts of violence towards women and girls. Violence against women often goes unreported, silenced by stigma, shame, fear of the perpetrators, and fear of justice systems based on patriarchy and colonialism that simply does not work for women. The COVID-19 pandemic, with all of its isolation and distancing, has further enabled unseen violence, which is sometimes called a second shadow pandemic of violence against women and girls, where women often found themselves in lockdown with their abusers. Gender-based violence in Canada has been magnified and amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been reports from police services, shelters, and local organizations of an increase in calls related to gender-based violence across Canada during the pandemic. We have seen it at our own houses with calls up 43.7%, and with a local RCMP, 22% of domestic violence calls increased. The National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women is about remembering those who have experienced gender-based violence and about those who we have lost to it. it is also a time to take action. Only 40% of women seek help of any sort after experiencing violence, and so we can advocate for and support women and girls' access to quality, multi-sectoral services essential for their safety, protection, and recovery, especially for those who already suffer multiple forms of discrimination. Some of the steps we have taken locally are to implement a safe reporting room in partnership with other women's organizations, including 2 of our sister Indigenous organizations. The Willow Room is located at Ann Davis Transition Society. It's a 24-hour reporting room where women can safely report violence, and a safe and culturally welcoming space to RCMP with a trained crisis interventionist on site for support. With unaffordable housing, and women and children are forced to stay longer in our transition houses. Women and children in violent households are often stuck in dangerous situations with no place to go. And with COVID, the numbers have risen even further. Chilliwack has the dubious distinction of having the highest ratio of homeless women in the province of BC at 43%. Women that are homeless or precariously housed are at a much higher risk of violence. To effectively respond to and ultimately prevent violence against women, we must provide supports that meet the immediate needs of victims and their families, such as safe and affordable housing, as well as supports as they move forward in their lives. At Ann Davis, as well as other organizations, we all work with women and children every day with support from the community, but sadly, it is not enough. We work every day to provide information and awareness, such as what we're doing here today, this event, to commemorate a terrible event of 1989, an event that works to change societal norms and attitudes that condone and normalize violence against women. Violence against women is just not okay. We know that official statistics are often conservative, as many victims do not report their victimization to police. Something that I like to refer to, which is a visualization, is in 2014 alone, the number of women and girls who reported sexual, physical, or verbal abuse would have filled a 60,000-seat football stadium. Think about that for a moment. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because we know cases of family and gender-based violence are underreported, often because victims are too afraid or embarrassed to speak out. We need to support women who report. This is unacceptable. We need and we can do better. Effectively addressing violence against women is a collective effort, a job for government, law enforcement, community groups, and each one of us. This is a collective responsibility for all of us in our community. You can help. Call your local women's shelter. See how you can contribute. Volunteer, donate, speak up. Ask the tough questions. Be an ally to women in these challenging times. Together, we can work towards ending violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. As we move forward together today in this digital space, my hope is that these tragedies of the past and remembering the tragedies of the past reinvigorate our energies and determination for the future. I hope that as we continue to reel from the resurgence of Black Lives Matter since June of 2020, the ongoing state and RCMP violence against the Wet'suwet'en land defenders, and the deep inequities and barriers revealed with COVID-19, that we see hope through remembrance, conversations, and storytelling. I'm a mother to 2 boys, and there has not been a single day that we have not sat and discussed anti-racism, feminism, and the power of our stories. It is through them I see hope, and indeed through education that I see hope. And if there is one thing we must carry with us always, it is that deep responsibility to speak out, share and spread these histories as well as messages of hope to enact the change we wish to seek in the world. In Sikhi, we have a word called seva, which means selfless service to all our communities always. We are each other's community and communities. And so my challenge to each of you is just as important as the response to the challenges that await us with the hope for change. I would now like to invite UFV's President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Joanne McLean, to say a few words.
Thank you, Sharon, for leading this vigil, and to Dr. Lola Hawk, to Michelle and Patty for your important words, and to Georgia and Tessa from UFE West for your involvement today. And thanks to everyone for watching, for helping us to mark December 6th. December 6th, 1989 is a day that I will remember like yesterday. It's a day at the university I then worked when our foundation and the foundation of employees and students was rocked by a senseless act of cowardice. And I will commemorate this day for the rest of my life. For today is a day to remember 14 young women senselessly killed at École Polytechnique in Montreal, and a day to remember countless other women in Canada and around the world, young and old, Indigenous and immigrant, many marginalized by visible and invisible factors, by race and ethnicity and color of skin, some thriving, but many who live in poverty, who are lost or in some way disabled or silenced, women who are victims to violence. And so today we remember. And importantly, today is a day that we must do more than just remember. Today is a day of action, a day to consider what each of us might do in the days and months ahead to play a role in eliminating gender-based violence, to stand up for change, to eliminate misogyny and sexism and hate. I hope that you, with me, will consider what you will do to help eliminate all forms of violence against girls and women. And here are some ideas that we all might consider. Let's use our voice. Let's start conversations with those that we know and maybe even complete strangers as an important step in shining light on the issues we face. Change comes from education and from understanding and from bringing societal issues out into the open. Let's help to create spaces where others feel safe speaking about violence against women. Let's engage with boys and men to become agents of change in preventing violence against women. And let's ask our politicians what's being done about homelessness, violence, racism, and mental health concerns, and other concerns within our communities. We can all volunteer at community organizations and through that, learn more about the issues at hand. Let's do what we can do to be role models, to be good to one another, to be kind, to be considerate, to consider making a difference in any way we are each able to do. I want to thank you for taking the time today to remember and to reflect on the ways in which you can make positive change in our society. Thank you.
We will now take a moment to officially recognize the 14 women who were killed that day in 1989. I would like to ask Tessa and Georgia from UFE West to proceed with the formal vigil.
On December 6, 1989, a lone gunman entered L'École Polytechnique de Montreal and began a rampage that would last nearly 20 minutes. This brutal attack still resonates with us today. He separated the women from the men, and he then opened fire on the women. In total, 14 women passed away that day.
The 14 women are as follows. Anne-Marie Lemay, a 22-year-old mechanical engineering student who sang in a rock band and at her church. Anne-Marie was helping to organize that year's graduation and was fundraising for a class trip overseas.
Anne-Marie Edward, a 21-year-old chemical engineering student who loved extreme sports. Anne-Marie was buried in her ski team jacket. After her death, her team wore patches on their own jackets of her initials.
Annie Saint-Elno, a 23-year-old mechanical engineering student. As a teenager, Annie represented her 4-H club at a provincial level. Annie was listening to a presentation in her last class before graduating when she passed away.
Annie Turcotte, a 20-year-old materials engineering student in her first year. Annie was an avid swimmer and was very interested in environmental issues. Annie lived with her brother at the time of her death.
Barbara Dignol, a 22-year-old mechanical engineering student in her final year of study. Barbara lived with her brother and was a teaching assistant for her father, Pierre Daniel, a mechanical engineering professor. Barbara was only 2 days away from handing in her final project at the time of her death.
Barbara Klushnik-Videvich, a 31-year-old first-year nursing student. Barbara had moved to Canada from Poland with her husband in 1987. Her husband has said that they moved to Canada because they believed it was the safest place in the world.
Geneviève Bergeron, a 21-year-old civil engineering student on a scholarship who had a hard time choosing between pursuing a career in engineering or music. Geneviève sang in a choir and played the clarinet. She babysat for Montreal's mayor at the time, Jean Dallet.
Hélène Colgan, a 23-year-old mechanical engineering student in her final year of study. Hélène had already received 3 job offers and was interested in pursuing a master's degree. Hélène had recently purchased a plane ticket to go on vacation to Cancun on December 29th with Nathalie Courteau. Hélène's parents found out about the shooting on television.
Maryse Lagagné. Maryse was a 25-year-old budget clerk who was married only 3 months before her death. Maryse was always smiling, according to her union boss. Her husband was waiting outside to pick her up at the time of the shooting.
Maryse Leclerc. Maryse was a 23-year-old materials engineering student who was one of the top students at École Polytechnique. Maryse was an actor in her free time. Her father, the director of public relations of the Montreal Police Force, discovered her body shortly after giving a press conference on the shooting. She was wearing the sweater she had worn to Sunday dinner the week before when he found her.
Maud Avelnik. Maud was a 29-year-old materials engineering student in her second year. Maud was specializing in composite metals and had previously completed a degree in environmental design. Maud was giving a final presentation on a metals project when she was killed.
Michelle Richard. Michelle was a 21-year-old second-year materials engineering student who was engaged to be married. Michelle was giving a presentation on a final project with Maud Havernick when she was killed.
Nathalie Coteau. Nathalie was a 23-year-old mechanical engineering student due to graduate in the spring. Nathalie had plans to vacation with Anna Kogai over the winter break. Nathalie's father is quoted as saying, 23 years aimed at graduating with a degree. She's only 3 months away from getting it and she's killed, all because she was sitting in a chair in a classroom.
Sonia Pelletier. Sonia was a 28-year-old mechanical engineering student attending her last day of classes before graduating. Sonia had a job interview arranged for the following week. Sonia's family said her dream was to start her own engineering firm.
Thank you, Tessa and Georgia. We will now observe a minute of silence. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.